I have a date at 8. This announcement disrupts the controlled atmosphere of the high-rise office. The words, "the room went cold," immediately amplify the emotional weight, suggesting a powerful shift in the dynamic between the characters. What starts as a routine moment quickly transforms into a pivotal confrontation, where the professional mask of Yi Hyun Kim, the Mafia boss, cracks. His immediate emotional reaction signals that this casual remark is more significant than it seems, drawing the audience in as they anticipate what will unfold next. Maya Thompson, a skilled and organized executive assistant, navigates her demanding role. The Seoul skyline, glittering like scattered diamonds, as Maya wraps up her workday, paints a picture of wealth, power, and tension. The subtle detail of her third attempt at a date with Eric Sanders shows how her personal life has been sidelined due to the demands of her job, underlining the conflict between her professional duties and personal desires. The contrast between Maya's work persona, sharp, efficient, and always in control, and her personal life, the casual mention of the date, sets up the emotional conflict. As Maya prepares to leave, Yi Hyun's reaction to her plans reveals a vulnerability that has been hidden beneath his composed exterior for months. His emotional response to her announcement shifts the dynamic from purely professional to intensely personal, setting the stage for the internal and external conflicts to follow. Hello family, welcome to Afro Soul Mafia Stories. Before we proceed to the story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comments section and also like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Now let's continue with the story. The silence in the expansive corner office was no longer the productive, heavy, quiet Maya had grown used to over the last 2 years. It had become a physical weight, pressing against her lungs. She stood by the mahogany desk, her hand still resting on the leather strap of her bag, her spine straight and her chin tilted in a display of practiced professional calm. Across from her, Yi Hyun Kim remained seated, but the marble statue aura he usually projected was splintering in real time. Eric Sanders, Yi Hyun repeated, the name sounding like a bitter oath in his mouth. He didn't look at the files she had meticulously prepared for Monday morning. Instead, his dark, piercing eyes were locked onto hers with an intensity that made the 47th floor feel like it was shrinking. "He's a teacher, you said." Yi Hyun's voice was low, carrying that dangerous edge he typically reserved for dismantling corporate rivals during hostile takeovers. "Yes, sir. At the international school," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the way her heart drummed against her ribs. She watched him closely, noting the micro-expressions she had spent 18 months cataloging, the sharp, angular line of his jaw tightening, and the way his fingers curled into a firm grip against the edge of his desk. Yi Hyun stood slowly, his 63 frame casting a long, intimidating shadow across the polished floor. He moved around the desk with the predatory grace of a man who was used to being the most dangerous person in any room. As he stepped into her personal space, the scent of his expensive, woodsy cologne enveloped her, a scent that had haunted her dreams far more than she would ever admit to him. "And what does a teacher from the international school have to offer you, Maya?" He used her first name, a sharp break from the Ms. Thompson that had served as their professional shield for years. "Does he understand the hours you keep? Does he know that you prefer your coffee black and your noodles without green onions?" Maya took a small, instinctive step back, her defensive stance clashing with the inexplicably thrilling spark that ignited whenever he was this close. "He offers me a Friday night that doesn't involve quarterly expenditures or Singapore contracts, Mr. Han," she countered, her large, expressive eyes flashing with a mix of vulnerability and fierce determination. "He offers me a life that belongs to me, not to Kim Holdings." The stoic mask Yi Hyun wore finally fractured completely. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled at the knot of his silk tie, loosening his collar in a rare concession of distress. The movement revealed the dark ink of the tattoo on his neck, a visual reminder of the ruthless world he commanded outside these glass walls. "Your life has been intertwined with mine for 18 months, he rasped, his voice losing its corporate polish and becoming something raw and desperate. "I have watched you manage my chaos, translate my silence, and redesign my strategies when they lacked vision. Do you truly think I can just sit here and let you walk out that door to meet a man who hasn't spent every single day falling in love with the way you challenge him?" He stopped just inches away, his gaze searching her face with a depth of intelligence and sensitivity that mirrored her own. In that moment, the CEO was gone. In his place was a man terrified of losing the only person who truly saw through his defenses. "I don't just want your competence, Maya," he whispered, his eyes dark with an emotional conflict that bordered on agony. "I want the right to be the one taking you to dinner. I want the right to make you laugh." Maya stared at him, her mind reeling as the professional boundary they had built so carefully turned to ash between them. The room was silent again, but the cold had been replaced by a heat that was far more dangerous. The tension in the office reached a boiling point, the air vibrating with a sudden, sharp electricity that had nothing to do with the humming servers of Kim Holdings. Maya gripped the strap of her bag tighter, her knuckles white. The raw vulnerability Yi Hyun had just displayed was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a dark, possessive focus that made her breath hitch. He didn't just want her to stay. He was demanding it with every inch of his commanding 63 frame. "You aren't going," he said, his voice dropping an octave into a low, gravelly rasp that felt like a physical caress against her skin. Maya's oval face set into a mask of defiance, her large eyes flashing. "I am Yi Hyun. My shift ended 20 minutes ago and Eric is waiting." She turned toward the heavy glass doors, her graceful movements forced as she tried to maintain her composure. But before she could take a single step, Yi Hyun moved. He didn't run. He glided with that predatory grace that defined him, cutting across the plush carpet to bridge the distance in 2 long strides. Before she could react, he was there, a wall of charcoal wool and cold authority blocking her path to the elevator. "I said cancel it," he commanded. It wasn't a request from a boss. It was a decree from a man who was used to the world bending to his will. "You don't have the right to tell me what to do with my time," Maya countered, her voice rising. "I am your secretary, not your property." "Tonight, the distinction doesn't matter to me," he snapped, his abrupt movements revealing the fraying edges of his control. As Maya reached out to push past him, his hand shot out with startling precision. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, not painfully, but with an unyielding firmness that pinned her in place. The contact was instantaneous and transformative. The electric spark they had both ignored for 2 years surged through the point of contact, a literal shock that made Maya's heart leap into her throat. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Yi Hyun's dark eyes were no longer stoic. They were stormy, swirling with a mix of desperation and a ruthless need to claim what he had spent months watching from a distance. His thumb traced a slow, deliberate line over her pulse point, feeling the frantic, telltale rhythm of her heart. "Cancel the date, Maya," he whispered, leaning down until his lips were inches from her ear, his warm breath ghosting over her skin. "Tell him an emergency came up. Tell him your boss is being unreasonable. Tell him whatever you want, but you are staying here, with me." The predatory focus in his gaze didn't waver. He was leveraging every bit of his power, his wealth, and his sheer physical presence to keep her anchored to the 47th floor. Maya felt her resolve crumbling under the weight of that touch, the heat of his palm seeping through her skin and into her blood. The normal life Eric Sanders offered felt miles away, eclipsed by the shadow of the man who was currently holding her world in his hands. "Is this a business order, Mr. Kim?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and an attraction she could no longer deny. Yi Hyun leaned back just enough to look her in the eye, his thumb still rhythmically stroking her wrist, fueling the fire between them. "No." He admitted, his jaw tight. "This is a personal one, and I'm not letting you go until you listen." The heavy silence of the office was broken only by the sound of Maya's own uneven breathing. Yi Hyun didn't let go of her wrist. Instead, his grip shifted, his fingers sliding down to lace through hers, anchoring her to him in a way that felt both like a sanctuary and a cage. He looked out at the sprawling expanse of Seoul below them, a city he essentially owned, a grid of light and steel that moved at his command. And for the first time, he looked tired of the weight of it all. "Do you know why I've been so cold to you these last few months, Maya?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, yet it filled every corner of the room. He didn't wait for an answer. "It wasn't because of the Singapore contract or the board meetings. It was because every time you walked into this room, I had to remind myself of who I am and who you deserve." He finally looked back at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes was replaced by a raw, jagged vulnerability that made Maya's heart ache. The kingpin had stepped aside, leaving only the man. He reached out with his free hand, his fingers hovering just inches from her cheek, hesitating before finally grazing the skin. His touch was light, almost reverent, as if he were afraid she might vanish if he pressed too hard. "I've spent 18 months fighting myself," he confessed, his angular jaw tight with the effort of the words. 18 months watching you move through this office with a grace I don't possess. I watched you handle men twice your age with a single look, and I watched you smile at everyone but me. I told myself it was for your own protection. My world is full of shadows, Maya. It's ruthless, it's predatory, and I didn't want to drag you into the dark just because I couldn't stand to be without your light. He took a step closer, forcing Maya to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. The pristine white of his shirt was still crumpled where he had loosened his collar, a visual testament to his unraveling. "But then you mentioned Eric. You mentioned a date, a life where I don't exist. And I realized that the thought of you belonging to someone else, someone who doesn't know the depth of your brilliance, someone who hasn't seen the way your eyes change when you've solved an impossible problem. It was a far greater darkness than anything my world could offer." Maya searched his face, seeing the truth in the sharp lines of his features. The man who could dismantle empires with a phone call was standing before her, trembling with the fear of a simple rejection. It was a staggering display of powerlessness from a man who had never known the word. "I've been a coward," he rasped, his thumb tracing the curve of her jawline. "I used my authority to keep you close because I was too terrified to ask you to stay as a man. I've lived in a world where everything has a price and everyone can be bought, but you are the only thing I've ever wanted that I couldn't simply take, and it has been driving me insane." The honesty in his voice was a physical force, stripping away Maya's own professional defenses. She saw the emotional struggle he had buried beneath the tailored suits and the stoic expressions, the quiet agony of a man who owned the city, but felt like he was starving for the one thing he couldn't control. "I don't want to be your boss tonight, Maya," he whispered, his forehead leaning against hers, his eyes closing as he inhaled the scent of her. "I just want to be the man who doesn't have to watch you leave." Maya remained still, her forehead resting against his for a heartbeat longer than she should have allowed. The heat radiating from Yi Hyun was intoxicating, a siren song of safety and power that threatened to drown out the voice of reason in her head. But as his fingers trailed lower, tracing the delicate column of her throat, the reality of their surroundings, the cold glass, the expensive mahogany, the literal height of his ivory tower, snapped her back to her senses. Gently but firmly, she pushed against his chest. Her hands felt the hard, frantic thrum of his heart through the fine cotton of his shirt, a rhythm that proved he was just as shaken as she was. She waited until he opened his eyes, those dark, intense pools now clouded with a desperate hope, before she spoke. "You say you want the right to make me laugh," Maya began, her voice gaining strength as she straightened her spine, resuming that upright, dominant posture that had earned her respect in rooms where she was never expected to be. "But you started this conversation by demanding I cancel my life. You used the same tone you use when you're ordering a liquidation, Yi Hyun. That isn't love. That's possession." Yi Hyun flinched as if she'd struck him, his hands dropping to his sides. "I was desperate, Maya. I didn't know how else to make you stay." "And that's the problem," she countered, her large, expressive eyes narrowing with a fierce determination. She took a deliberate step back, reclaiming the space he had so effortlessly invaded. "I have spent 2 years building a reputation in this city and in this company. As a black woman in corporate soul, I don't have the luxury of making mistakes. I have worked twice as hard to be half as visible, and I have done it by being the most professional person in every room. If I stay because you ordered it, I'm not your partner. I'm just another asset you've managed to secure." She watched his jaw tighten, the angular lines of his face sharpening in the moonlight. She knew she was touching a nerve, challenging the very core of how he moved through the world. "I need respect more than I need your protection," she continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "You talk about your world being full of shadows and predators, but you forget that I've navigated those same shadows right beside you. I don't need you to hide me from the dark. I need you to recognize that I have my own light, and it doesn't belong to Kim Holdings. It doesn't belong to you." The silence that followed was different now. It was heavy with the weight of her words. Yi Hyun stood tall, his lean, muscular frame rigid, but his eyes betrayed the vulnerability she had uncovered. He looked at her not as his secretary, but as a woman who held a power over him that no amount of money could replicate. "You think Eric Sanders sees that light better than I do?" he asked, the bitterness returning, though it was tempered now by a genuine need to understand. "Eric sees a woman he wants to get to know over dinner," Maya said simply. "He doesn't have the power to fire me. He doesn't have the power to ruin my career if things go wrong. With him, I am just Maya. With you, the lines are so blurred I can barely see where my work ends and my heart begins. If we are ever going to be anything, Yi Hyun, it can't be because you blocked the door. It has to be because I chose to stay." She reached for her phone, which lay on the corner of the desk, the screen still glowing with a missed text from Eric. "I need to know that you can value my agency as much as you value my efficiency, because I won't be a trophy in your collection, no matter how much I might want to be in your arms." The blue light of her smartphone illuminated the sharp planes of Maya's face, casting long shadows across the desk as she stared at the message from Eric. "Just parked. Can't wait to see you, Maya." It was a simple, kind sentence, a window into a world of normalcy, of dinners that ended in polite conversation rather than high-stakes power plays. Eric Sanders was the safe harbor she had been searching for, the man who represented a life where her worth wasn't measured in crisis management or the ability to anticipate a billionaire's every whim. Maya looked up, her gaze meeting Yi Hyun's. He hadn't moved. He stood like a dark sentinel against the backdrop of the Seoul skyline, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his chest rising and falling in a rhythmic, controlled heave. The vulnerability he had shown was still there, raw and jagged, bleeding through the cracks of his charcoal suit. He was waiting for her to choose, to run to the safety of the man downstairs or to stay and face the thrilling chaos he offered. With a steady hand and a heavy heart, Maya swiped the screen. She didn't text, she called. She owed Eric that much. "Hey, Eric," she said softly, her voice echoing in the cavernous office. Yi Hyun flinched at the sound of the name, his jaw tightening so hard she could hear the faint grind of his teeth. "Maya, I'm right outside. Are you coming down?" Eric's voice was warm, full of an easy patience that felt a million miles away from the electric tension currently suffocating the 47th floor. "Eric, I am so sorry," Maya said, her eyes never leaving Yi Hyun's. The CEO's gaze was piercing, an intense, dark fire that seemed to consume the space between them. "Something has come up at the office. Something critical. I won't be able to make it tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Again, Maya, that's the third time this month. Is everything okay? Does he have you working through the night again?" "It's not just work, Eric," she said, her voice dropping an octave as she felt Yi Hyun take a half-step closer, drawn to her words like a moth to a flame. "There are things I need to settle here, things that can't wait until Monday. You're a wonderful man, Eric, truly, but I can't be there tonight. I'm sorry." She ended the call before he could argue, the finality of the click sounding like a gavel in the silence. She set the phone down on the mahogany surface with a deliberate click. She had chosen. She hadn't chosen to submit, and she hadn't chosen to be possessed. She had chosen to resolve the storm that had been brewing for 18 months. Yi Hyun exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to deflate some of the predatory aggression in his posture. He looked at her with a mix of awe and profound relief. "You stayed," he rasped, the words thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I didn't stay for you, Yi Hyun," Maya corrected him, her voice firm even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I stayed for us, because if I walked out that door tonight, we would have spent the rest of our lives wondering what was real and what was just the adrenaline of the office. But don't mistake this for surrender." She straightened the lapels of her white blouse, her movements precise and graceful. "The date is canceled. The chaos is here. Now show me that you're the man who can handle a woman who doesn't report to him. Show me that you can be ruthless for me, not just against me." Yi Hyun took the final steps toward her, his dark eyes searching hers for any sign of regret. Finding none, he reached out, not to grip her wrist this time, but to cup her face with a reverence that made her breath catch. The kingpin was gone, replaced by a man who had finally found something more valuable than his empire. Yi Hyun withdrew his hand from her face, but the warmth of his touch lingered like a brand. He walked back toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city he dominated, his reflection ghosting against the glass. The air in the room had shifted. The frantic, possessive energy was being replaced by the cold, tactical brilliance that had made him the most feared CEO in Seoul. "You were right, Maya," he said, his voice regaining its low, resonant authority. "As long as you are my secretary, there is no equality. There is only the shadow of my power over your career. I told you I was ruthless, and I am. But I am most ruthless when it comes to securing what is mine." He turned back to her, and for the first time that night, a slow, predatory smirk touched his lips. It wasn't the smile of a lover, but of a grandmaster who had already seen 20 moves ahead. He reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal blazer and pulled out a single, heavy vellum envelope, sliding it across the mahogany desk toward her. Maya stepped forward, her movements graceful yet cautious. She opened the envelope and felt her breath hitch. It wasn't a termination notice or a contract of silence. It was a formal appointment letter, already signed and stamped with the seal of the board of directors. "VP of Strategic Development," she whispered, her large eyes scanning the document in disbelief. "Yi Hyun, this role, it doesn't report to the CEO's office." "No," he said, his dark eyes burning with a triumphant light. "It reports directly to the board. You will have your own budget, your own floor, and your own staff. You will be a peer to every man in this building who previously looked at you as an assistant. I spent the last 3 weeks maneuvering the shareholders to ensure this position was ironclad. I didn't do it to lose you, Maya. I did it so that when I finally ask you to stay, you aren't doing it because I sign your paychecks." The sheer scale of his calculation was staggering. While Maya had been worrying about the ethics of a workplace romance, Yi Hyun had been quietly restructuring his empire to dismantle the very barrier that kept them apart. It was a move of absolute corporate ruthlessness, bypassing protocols and forcing the board's hand, all to ensure that Maya Thompson could stand on a pedestal of her own making. "I tripled the standard compensation package," he added, his voice dropping to a private, intimate register as he moved back into her space. "And the contract includes a severance clause that triggers automatically if I ever attempt to interfere with your professional autonomy. You wanted respect over possession. This is my respect. This is me ensuring that even if you never choose me, you will never be half as visible as anyone else in this city again." Maya looked from the document to the man standing before her. The marble statue was gone, replaced by a strategist who had used his greatest weapon, his power, to set her free from it. This was the ruthless side of Yi Hyun Kim she hadn't expected, a man who would burn down the corporate hierarchy just to make sure she was safe within the flames. "You had this ready the whole time?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and a new, deeper kind of attraction. "Even while you were demanding I cancel my date?" "I had it ready for the moment I finally found the courage to tell you the truth," he admitted, his gaze softening. "I didn't want to trap you, Maya. I wanted to give you a throne so that if you ever did decide to sit beside me, the world would know you earned it." Maya felt the last of her professional armor fall away. She wasn't just his secretary anymore. The power imbalance hadn't just been addressed, it had been obliterated by the very man who held the scale. Maya looked down at the vellum appointment letter, the weight of the document matching the gravity of the moment. She felt the shift in the room. The air was no longer thick with the suffocating heat of a boss demanding his employees stay, but with the expansive, terrifying freedom of a woman being offered the world on a silver platter. She looked back at Yi Hyun, whose dark, intense eyes watched her with a vulnerability that contradicted his sharp, angular jawline. He was a man who had just surrendered his greatest leverage to prove his sincerity. "It's a magnificent move, Yi Hyun," Maya said softly, her voice carrying a depth of intelligence that made him lean in. She stepped toward him, the hem of her tailored skirt brushing against the mahogany desk. "Ruthless, tactical, and incredibly generous, but a title change doesn't instantly erase 2 years of power dynamics. It doesn't wash away the fact that until 5 minutes ago, you were my superior." Yi Hyun's gaze flickered, a rare moment of emotional softness crossing his features. "I know. That's why the contract is ironclad, Maya. You are independent of me now." "Legally, yes," she countered, her large, expressive eyes searching his. "But socially, emotionally, If we walk out of this office as a couple tonight, the rumors will be that I slept my way into a VP role. They'll say my strategic development was nothing more than a bedroom favor. I've worked too hard for my name to be a footnote in your biography. Yi Hyun's fist tensed against the desk, his knuckles turning white. I don't care what they think. I only care about you. But I care, Maya said, her movement precise and graceful as she placed the letter back on the desk. And if you truly respect me, you'll care too. Which is why I'm accepting the position, but I'm setting the terms for us. Yi Hyun straightened his spine, his posture upright and dominant once more, but his eyes were wide with anticipation. Tell me. 90 days, Maya stated. A 3-month cooling-off period. Starting Monday, I move into the 45th floor. We are colleagues, Yi Hyun, nothing more. We speak in board meetings, we collaborate on the Singapore contracts, and we maintain absolute, complete professionalism. Yi Hyun started to speak, but she held up a hand, her gestures assertive. No lingering looks in the hallway, no private dinners in this office after hours, no electric touches when you think no one is watching. We need to prove to the board, to the staff, and most importantly, to ourselves, that our bond is real and not just a product of office proximity. I want to know that when I finally walk into a restaurant with you, it's because we chose each other as equals, not because we were trapped in the same high-rise. The silence that followed was heavy with Yi Hyun's internal struggle. His dark black hair, usually so perfectly styled, was slightly mussed from his earlier agitation. He looked like a man who had been offered a drink of water only to be told he had to wait 3 months to swallow. 3 months of silence, he rasped, his voice losing its corporate polish. Maya, I've already waited 18 months. Every day I don't get to call you mine feels like a year. Then 90 days should be easy for a man with your discipline, Maya said, a subtle, fierce smile playing on her lips. She stepped closer, close enough to see the slight loosening of his white collar, but she didn't touch him. Prove to me that you can value my professional reputation as much as your own desires. Prove that you can be patient for a woman who is worth the wait. Yi Hyun took a long, shuddering breath, his dark eyes burning with a mix of agony and profound admiration. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who had just redesigned the rules of his world. 90 days, he agreed, his voice a low promise that vibrated through the floorboards. But on day 91, I am taking you to the best restaurant in the city, and there won't be a single person in Seoul who will doubt why you're sitting across from me. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, biting clarity that matched the shift in Maya's spirit. As the elevator ascended to the executive levels of Kim Holdings, she caught her reflection in the polished chrome doors. She had swapped the high-waisted skirts of her assistant days for a tailored navy power suit that fit her like armor. Her natural curls were gathered into a sleek, polished updo, and her jewelry was minimal, a luxury watch and silver studs, reflecting a woman who no longer moved at the beck and call of another, but according to her own rhythm. When the doors opened on the 45th floor, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of fresh paint and silent curiosity. This was her domain now, the Department of Strategic Development. Her former colleagues watched with wide eyes as she moved through the floor with graceful, precise movements. There was no hesitation in her stride, no files clutched to her chest as a shield. She was no longer the bridge to the CEO. She was the destination. The true test, however, waited on the 50th floor in the grand boardroom. As Maya entered the room, the low hum of conversation from the directors died down. At the head of the long obsidian table sat Yi Hyun Kim. He looked every bit the billionaire kingpin, dressed in a black charcoal suit, his dark hair styled back with lethal precision. His expression was a fortress of stoicism, his angular jaw set as he reviewed the digital tablet in front of him. Maya took her seat at the opposite end of the table, the seat reserved for the vice president. She felt the weight of a dozen gazes on her, searching for a crack, a sign that she was out of her depth. She didn't give them one. "The floor is yours, Vice President Thompson," Yi Hyun said. His voice was professional, devoid of the gravelly rasp that had haunted her dreams over the weekend. To anyone else, he sounded bored, but Maya noticed the slight tightening of his fist against the table. He was keeping his promise. Maya stood, her posture upright and dominant. "Thank you," CEO Kim, if you'll direct your attention to the screens, we'll begin with the restructuring of our Southeast Asian logistics. For the next hour, Maya commanded the room. She was sharp, tactical, and uncompromising, answering the director's pointed questions with a depth of intelligence that silenced any lingering doubts about her appointment. Throughout the presentation, she kept her word. She didn't look for his approval. She didn't seek his gaze. She focused on the work, establishing the boundaries of her new reality with the same discipline she had used to manage his life for 2 years. It was only when the meeting adjourned and the directors began to file out, murmuring in impressed tones, that the mask slipped, if only for a microsecond. Yi Hyun remained in his chair, ostensibly busy with his tablet. Maya gathered her things, her movements calm and deliberate. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back. Yi Hyun raised his head at the exact same moment. There were no words, no electric touches, no lingering sighs, but in the dark, intense depths of his eyes, she saw the countdown. He looked at her not as his secretary, but as the formidable woman who was currently outperforming every man in his building. A small, secret smile played at the corner of Maya's lips, a silent acknowledgement of the challenge she had set. Yi Hyun's gaze softened just enough for her to see the pride buried beneath his authority. He offered a nearly imperceptible nod, a silent, well done, that carried more weight than any promotion. Maya turned and walked out, the click of her heels echoing with the confidence of a woman who knew she was exactly where she belonged. 89 days to go. The air in the hallway felt lighter already. The 89 days had passed in a blur of late-night strategy sessions, high-stakes board meetings, and the silent, disciplined dance of 2 people refusing to break. Maya had excelled as the vice president of strategic development, turning Kim Holdings' logistics into a global benchmark. She had proven her merit to the board, to the industry, and most importantly, to herself. She was no longer just the woman behind the CEO. She was the woman who sat opposite him, holding her own with a brilliance that was undeniable. On day 90, the tension that had been a low-humming wire for 3 months finally snapped. Maya spent her afternoon finalizing the merger details for the Seoul London initiative, her mind drifting to the calendar notification that had popped up on her phone that morning, day 91. She stayed late, finishing her work with the same precise movements that had always defined her, though her heart beat with a rhythm that was anything but professional. When she finally stepped into the executive elevator and pressed the button for the 50th floor, the sun was already setting, painting the office in shades of deep gold and amber. Yi Hyun was waiting for her. He wasn't behind his desk. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his charcoal jacket discarded and the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his elbows. He looked less like the marble statue and more like the man who had gripped her wrist in desperation 3 months ago. When he turned to face her, the stoicism he had worn like armor for 90 days vanished. "The clock just struck midnight, Maya," he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a familiar spark of electricity through her. Maya walked toward him, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She stopped just inches away, looking up into those dark, intense eyes. "I believe I promised you a date on day 91. Yi Hyun reached out, his movements no longer hesitant or predatory, but filled with a profound reverence. His fingers brushed against her cheek, trailing down to the corner of her mouth. Then, for the first time in the 2 years she had known him, Yi Hyun Kim truly smiled. It wasn't the smirk of a victor or the polite curve of a businessman. It was a genuine, radiant expression of joy that softened his angular jawline and made the vulnerability in his eyes clear for the world to see. "You have no idea how many times I almost broke," he admitted, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "How many times I wanted to walk down 2 floors just to see if you were still wearing that navy suit. How many times I wanted to tell the board to go to hell because they were taking up time I wanted to spend with you." Maya leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as she felt the heat of him. "But you didn't. You gave me the space to be myself, Yi Hyun. You gave me the respect I asked for." "Because you were worth every second of the wait," he whispered. He stepped into her personal space, his forehead resting against hers, echoing the night this journey began. "These 90 days proved that we aren't just a product of proximity, Maya. We've built something that could survive the light of day, the scrutiny of the board, and anything else this city tries to throw at us." He pulled a small, velvet box from his pocket, not a ring, but a key. I bought a place in the hills, no corporate ties, no Kim Holdings branding, just a home where we can be Maya and Yi Hyun. I want our first real date to be there, away from the shadows. Maya looked at the key, then back at the man who had redefined his entire world to fit her within it. She realized then that the Ruthless CEO had found his match, and the black secretary had found her equal. "The 3 months are over, Yi Hyun," she said, her voice a soft, fierce promise. "They are," he agreed, his gaze darkening with a heat that promised a lifetime. "And our forever is just beginning." As the moon rose over Seoul, painting the 50th floor in silver, they finally bridged the final inch. It wasn't an order, a demand, or a professional obligation. It was a choice, made in total equality, with a love that had finally earned it right to stay.